The moment she stepped through that bar door, I knew I was in trouble. Not because she was beautiful, not because she was confident, but because she had just heard the joke my friend made about her, and I hadn't stopped him. In that second, I understood something uncomfortable. Whatever happened next would define who I really was. Stay silent and walk away, like I always do, or open my mouth and risk becoming the bad guy in my friend's story instead. She stood there, waiting. And so was I. For a heartbeat, no one moved. My friend Mark still had that half-smile on his face, the kind you wear when you think you're being funny and haven't realized you've gone too far. The words were still hanging in the air, careless, loud, meant to impress the table, not meant to be heard by the person they were about. But she had heard them. I saw it in the way she paused, just slightly, like she was deciding whether this night was already a mistake. I should tell you who I am before I tell you what I did next. My name is Alex. I'm 32 years old, a project design engineer, the kind of guy who solves problems on paper and avoids them in real life. I live in a small coastal town in Maine, where the harbor smells like salt and rust, and everyone pretends they don't notice each other's routines. I work remotely, which means I can go days without talking to anyone face to face if I choose. After a breakup that left me feeling emptied out and stupid for having trusted someone, I built my life around one rule. Don't get attached, and nothing can hurt you. That rule was why I was sitting in that bar in the first place. A few guys from my old basketball team were in town for the weekend, loud and nostalgic, trying to prove we were still the same people we were at 22. They dragged me to this new wine bar on the waterfront, polished wood, soft music, candles that made everyone look kinder than they deserved. Relax, Mark had said, slapping my shoulder. It's just a joke date. 1 hour. We'll die laughing. I agreed because it felt safe. A joke has an exit. A joke doesn't ask you to stay. But standing there, watching her walk toward our table, calm and steady, I realized how thin that excuse sounded. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't offended either. She was observant, and somehow that felt worse. Mark jumped up too fast and reached out his hand. Sarah. Hey, this is Alex. I stood, knocked my knee into the table leg, and the candle flickered like it wanted to leave too. Hi, I said. It came out quieter than I meant it to. Around us, I felt other conversations slow, people pretending not to listen. Mark kept talking, trying to smooth it over, explaining too much. We told Alex you'd be a good sport, he said, chuckling. Good sport. Like she was a test. Something in my chest tightened. I didn't want to be the guy who let that slide, but I also didn't want to turn on my friends. That hesitation, that familiar instinct to protect my comfort, almost won. Almost. Mark, stop, I said. My voice surprised even me. He froze. You're making her the punchline. The smile slipped off his face. Relax, man, I'm kidding. I know, I said. That's the problem. I turned back to her. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve to hear that. It wasn't brave. It was late. But it was honest, and honesty felt dangerous in a way I wasn't used to anymore. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled out a chair and sat down slowly, like she was testing the weight of the moment. Then she placed her phone face down on the table, deliberately, like a timer. She finally looked straight at me and said, I have 15 minutes. If you're here to laugh at me, let's not waste them. That was the second hook. Not anger. Not accusation. A boundary. I nodded, suddenly very aware of how badly I wanted to cross it without permission. I didn't come to laugh at you, I said. I came because I thought it would be easy. And I'm realizing I was wrong. She studied me the way you read fine print, searching for what's not being said. I wondered what she saw. A man trying too late to fix a bad first impression, or someone who might actually listen. Outside the window, the harbor lights blinked against the dark water, and I had the strange sense that if I messed this up, it wouldn't just be another awkward night. It would be proof that my rule had finally run out. We ordered drinks. The conversation moved carefully at first, like walking on a dock you're not sure will hold your weight. She asked what I did. I told her about engineering, about designing things meant to last. She smiled at that, just a little. She told me she owned a bookstore cafe in town, hosted reading nights for older locals who didn't have many places left to go. There was a steadiness in the way she talked, like she wasn't trying to sell herself, just stating facts. Every 60 seconds, something inside me wanted to pull back, to make a joke, to keep it light, to turn this into the story my friends expected. And every time, I stopped myself. Because for the first time in years, Walking away felt heavier than staying. When the 15 minutes were almost up, she glanced at her phone again. "Time's almost gone," she said. I swallowed. "If you leave now," I said, "I won't blame you. But if you stay, I promise I won't treat you like a joke." She held my gaze for a long second. Then she set the phone back down and said, "Finish your drink." I didn't know it then, but that small decision, to speak up, to stay uncomfortable, to let someone see me without armor, was the moment everything else in my life began to shift. I opened my laptop the next morning and saw the subject line that would have been easier to ignore than to read. Final draft, downtown waterfront redevelopment. My cursor hovered over it like it was a hot stove. One click and I'd know. One click, and I'd have to decide what kind of man I was when nobody was watching. I shut the lid instead. That's what I did back then. When a truth looked sharp, I treated it like a blade and stepped away. My name is Alex. I'm 32, a project design engineer in a coastal town in Maine where the air tastes like salt and old rope, and the same people sit on the same benches every morning like the tide schedules them. I live alone near the pier. I'm good at structures, load paths, and keeping my life quiet. After a breakup that made me feel foolish for believing in someone, I built my days around one rule. Don't get pulled in. If you never step too close, nothing can drag you under. And then there was Sarah. After that joke date at the wine bar, I told myself the whole thing was over. She'd given me 15 minutes. She'd stayed for one drink. She'd looked at me like she could see the part of me that wanted to run, and she didn't chase it. When I got home, I stood in my kitchen with the lights off, replaying every word, every pause, every time her eyes held mine and made me feel accountable. I should have felt proud for speaking up. Instead, I felt exposed, like I'd taken off armor I didn't know how to put back. I tried to do what I always do, turn emotion into routine. I went down to the harbor early, watched gulls circle the boats, answered emails, calibrated my day to the steady hum of normal. But Sarah's voice kept returning, calm, firm, not asking for anything. It was the not asking that got me. It left space for my own choices, and I didn't like what I wanted to choose. By noon I was in my truck, telling myself I needed a new fishing map. That was half true. The other half was I wanted to see if she was real outside candlelight and awkward apologies. Her bookstore sat on a corner in the older part of town, brick walls, windows, a chalkboard sign that read today, "Coffee, stories, quiet." When I stepped inside, warmth hit my face. Paper, cinnamon, something clean and familiar. A bell rang above the door, and my stomach tightened like I'd walked into an exam I hadn't studied for. She looked up from behind the counter. Not surprised. Not pleased. Just present. "Alex," she said, like my name was a fact, not a question. "I needed a map," I said, and hated how small it sounded. She nodded, reached under the counter, and set a folded chart in front of me. Harbor currents. Locals ask for it when they pretend they're here for practical reasons. That should have embarrassed me. It did. But it also made me laugh. Quietly, the first real laugh in a while. "Do I look like I'm pretending?" She tilted her head. "You tell me." I paid for the map. Then I didn't leave. I drifted to a wooden table in the back where a few older men sat with mugs and worn paperbacks. One of them raised a hand at Sarah and called, "Next week, same chapter, Miss Sarah." She answered with a patience that felt practiced. Caring, not performative. It made something in my chest ache in a way I didn't have a name for. She brought me a coffee without asking. "No timer today," she said. "That feels dangerous," I replied. "Only if you waste it." We talked about tourists who take photos of lobstermen like they're museum exhibits, about storms that change the shoreline overnight, about how a town can feel like a small room when you're trying not to touch the walls. Then, without warning, she slid a book across the table. The cover was faded, the spine taped. The title was about a city that survived because ordinary people refused to let it be erased. "My dad's reading this," she said. "He says it reminds him that places matter." "My work is making places," I said, and felt the irony like grit between my teeth. Her eyes narrowed, not unkindly. "Making them for who?" That question followed me out the door. Here's the part I'm not proud of. I didn't text her that night. Or the next. I told myself it was respectful. I told myself she was older, established, busy. I told myself my friends would turn it into a story again. The truth was simpler. I could feel myself caring, and caring is the first step toward losing control. So I waited, like delay could keep me safe. On the third evening I saw her across the street, guiding an older man with careful steps. Her father, I realized, because he looked like her around the eyes. She adjusted his scarf, smiled, and for a second the whole town felt softer. I stood there with my phone in my hand, and still didn't press send. The next morning, my inbox had the same email at the top. Final draft. My hands shook as I opened my laptop. I clicked. The file loaded, line after line of neat, impersonal planning. Then I saw it, her address, flagged in gray. Bookstore, non-priority demolition. I stared at the line on my screen until the words stopped looking like English and started looking like a verdict. Bookstore, non-priority demolition. My finger hovered over the trackpad, useless. I could close the file and pretend I never saw it. I could call Sarah and tell her the truth. Or I could do what I'd done for years. Choose the option that kept my life quiet, even if it made me the kind of man I hated. The worst part wasn't that the building was marked for removal. The worst part was how easy it would be for me to let it happen without anyone knowing I had a chance to stop it. My name is Alex. I'm 32, a project design engineer in a small coastal town in Maine where the harbor lights blink like they're counting your mistakes. I design structures for a living, but I've spent the last few years designing distance, between me and other people, between me and anything that could hurt. And now a woman I'd met on a joke date had become a problem my rules couldn't solve. I closed the file. Not because I didn't care. Because I did. And caring makes you accountable. The next day my company held a video meeting with the usual tidy slides and confident voices. The town's waterfront redevelopment was officially moving forward, and our firm had the engineering contract. Everyone congratulated each other like we'd just won something clean. Then my manager, Dennis, spoke, smooth, polite, and cold in the way people get when they're used to being obeyed. This project, he said, is high visibility. The kind that separates background employees from future leaders. I felt the hook sink in. Future leaders. Promotion. Recognition. A way out of the quiet life I complained about in private. Dennis's eyes landed on my name in the participant list. Alex, you've got local familiarity, he added. You'll be valuable. Just remember, we're here to deliver, not to debate. After the meeting, he called me directly. No small talk. I saw you open the final draft, he said. My stomach tightened. Yeah, I answered, trying to sound casual. I was reviewing the scope. Good, he replied. Stay aligned. The town council wants efficiency. No surprises. When he hung up, I sat there listening to the buzz of my laptop fan like it was a warning. That was the second hook. Someone was watching. In engineering, you learn that small loads add up. Pressure doesn't need to be loud to be dangerous. The town announced the timeline publicly a few days later. 3 weeks to final approval. 3 weeks until non-priority demolition became a real crew with real machines. 3 weeks until Sarah's bookstore stopped being a warm room that smelled like cinnamon and paper and became a blank space on a glossy brochure. I told myself I'd figure it out. I told myself I had time. But time is a lie you tell when you're afraid of the next phone call. I kept going to the harbor. I answered emails. I measured my days in safe tasks. And at night, when my phone lit up, I felt a sharp hope, and then guilt when it wasn't her. She didn't text. I didn't either. I convinced myself it was respectful. The truth was uglier. I didn't want to pull her into a mess I might not have the courage to fight. Then, on a windy Thursday, I ended up back in her bookstore without planning to. I told myself I needed coffee. I told myself I needed quiet. I didn't tell myself the real reason. I needed to see her face before I decided what kind of choice I was making. She looked up when the bell rang, and her expression softened for half a second before returning to steady. Maps again, she asked. I'm branching out, I said. Trying books now. She didn't smile, but her eyes warmed. That would be a good look on you. I sat at the wooden table in back. The older men were there, same worn paperbacks, same easy jokes. One of them tapped the cover of the faded novel she'd shown me before, the one about a city saved by ordinary people. Miss Sarah says this book's about stubborn folks, he said. Must be why she likes it. Sarah rolled her eyes gently. It's about people who don't leave when it gets hard, she corrected. The words hit me like a direct look, even though she hadn't aimed them at me. Hook number 3. She was talking about me without knowing it. Later, when the men left and the shop grew quiet, Sarah wiped the counter with slow, practiced movements. I watched her, and the truth sat in my chest like a stone. Your dad used to build things. I asked because I needed her to talk, and I needed myself to listen. She leaned against the counter. He helped renovate half this block, she said. Back when the town cared more about who lived here than who visited. Her voice softened. He used to say buildings are just promises made visible. You either keep them or you break them. I swallowed. My mouth opened. The confession was right there. And then my fear grabbed the steering wheel. That's a good way to put it, I managed. Her gaze sharpened. You sound like you're carrying something heavy, she said. I'm fine, I lied. It was small, but it was a lie. And lies have weight too. When I left, the harbor wind felt colder than usual. In my truck, I stared at my phone for a full minute, thumb hovering over her name. Tell her, I thought. Tell her now. Then I pictured Dennis's calm voice. I pictured my promotion disappearing. I pictured Sarah's face changing when she realized I'd known. And I did nothing. That night, I opened the final draft again. I scrolled to the line. Bookstore, non-priority demolition. My hands didn't shake this time. That scared me more. I opened a blank document and typed a new heading. Alternative layout proposal, preserve existing community structures. I wrote one sentence, then stopped. Outside my window, fog rolled in off the water, swallowing the pier lights one by one. I could almost hear the town becoming something else. Then my email pinged. One new message from Dennis. The subject line was short enough to hurt. We need TO talk. Dennis called at 7:12 a.m., the kind of time that tells you it isn't a conversation, it's a correction. I answered with my throat already tight, and before I could say hello he said, Alex, I read your draft. My name is Alex. I'm 32, a project design engineer in a small Maine harbor town where news travels faster than the tide. I'm telling you this because the next choice I made didn't happen in a boardroom. It happened in my chest, where fear and decency went to war. Dennis didn't raise his voice. That was the problem. You're talented, he said, smooth as glass. But this project isn't a community essay. We deliver what the client approved. Delete your alternative. Today. Stay aligned. I stared at the gray water outside my window. What if the plan can be improved? I asked. It can't, Dennis said. It can only be delayed. And delays have names attached. Don't make yours one of them. You want to be a future leader? Prove you can follow. When the call ended, my laptop fan hummed like a nervous laugh. I told myself I'd think. Instead, I went quiet. Quiet at work, quiet with my friends, quiet with Sarah. An hour later, an email popped up from Dennis. Alignment check. No greeting. No smile. Just a leash. I could hear him. No surprises. And I understood it wasn't about the project. It was about keeping me small. On my phone, Mark texted a laughing emoji and, "You still seeing the book, lady?" I stared at it, feeling my face heat. If I answered, I'd turn Sarah into a story again. If I didn't, I'd keep hiding. I put the phone down, and the silence felt like another choice. 2 days later, I walked into her bookstore cafe. The bell rang, and for a second her face softened. Then it shut down, like a light clicking off. That change hit harder than any accusation. "You've been busy," she said. "Work's intense," I answered. "True, and still a dodge." She set a mug down. "People have been talking," she said. "About the waterfront project. About what's getting cleared." My stomach dropped. The town had given her the story before I had. I didn't know what to say, I started. Sarah's laugh was short, humorless. Convenient. I stepped closer. "Sarah, don't," she cut in, not loud but final. "I'm not looking for explanations that arrive late. I'm looking for truth. Tell her now. Or lose her without ever being honest." "I saw the draft," I admitted. "Your building was marked for demolition." Her eyes didn't widen. They narrowed, like she'd been bracing for confirmation. "And you still sat at that table," she said quietly. "Drank my coffee. Let me talk about my dad." "I was trying to fix it," I said, and heard how thin it sounded. She leaned forward. "I don't want to be someone's lesson, Alex. I don't want to be a good experience you take with you when you move on. I'm not planning to move." She lifted a hand, stopping me. "You don't know what you're planning. Men your age never do." Then, sharper than I expected, she said, "You're like the rest. You come here, you take what feels warm, and when it gets hard you disappear." It stung because it wasn't fully true, and because a part of me had been doing exactly that. "I'm sorry," I said. "I should have told you sooner." Sarah's voice dropped. "My father built this block with his hands. Those men in the back. That reading night is the only thing that gets him out some weeks. If this place goes, they don't just lose a building. They lose each other." I nodded, the stone in my chest getting heavier. I hear you. Do you? She asked. Because hearing is easy. Staying is the hard part. I left without asking for forgiveness. I sat in my truck at the pier, phone in my hand, thumb hovering, then lowering. Every instinct begged me to retreat and call this complicated. But her line, "They lose each other," kept looping. That night I reopened my alternative layout proposal. I stripped it down to facts, costs, timelines, a clean integration that kept the bookstore standing. Then I sent it through the internal channel Dennis had warned me not to use for debate. The next evening, I didn't text Sarah. I didn't ask permission. I just showed up for reading night. The back room was full of older men and soft laughter. Sarah stood at the front with a book, calm like armor. Her father sat near the aisle, cane against his chair. I took the last seat and listened. Boats, wars, lost brothers, second chances nobody expected. When it ended, chairs scraped, goodbyes filled the air. I stayed and started stacking chairs without a word. Sarah watched me from the counter. For a long moment she didn't move. Then she lifted the other end of a folding table and carried it with me. No smiles. No forgiveness. Just weight shared. Her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and something in her expression tightened. "City Hall," she murmured and answered. I watched her listen still. When she hung up, she looked at me like the ground had shifted. "They moved the hearing up," she said. "Next week." When Dennis called after the hearing, he didn't bother with threats anymore. His voice was flat, like he was reading weather. "Your promotion is off the table," he said. "Effective immediately." For a second I couldn't hear anything but the blood in my ears. I'd walked into City Hall that morning thinking the hardest part would be speaking in public. I was wrong. The hardest part was realizing my whole life had been built around avoiding consequences. And now, finally, I was choosing one. My name is Alex. I'm 32, a project design engineer in a small Maine harbor town where people remember what you stood for long after they forget what you built. If you're listening to this, you're hearing the week I stopped living like everything important was optional. It started the night Sarah told me the hearing had been moved up. "Next week," she'd said, eyes tight. The words weren't dramatic, but they hit like a countdown. 3 weeks had become 7 days. A plan on paper had become a clock in the real world. The next morning I walked into her bookstore before opening. The lights were still low, the air smelled like yesterday's coffee and paper. Sarah was at the counter, writing something on a clipboard with the steady focus of someone who's learned not to panic in front of other people. She looked up when she heard me. "You came early," she said. "I didn't sleep," I admitted. "Neither did I," she replied, and for the first time in days I heard tired honesty instead of guarded strength. In the back room, her father sat with a book open on his lap. The faded novel again, the one about a city saved by ordinary people. He looked up and nodded at me, slow and careful, like movement cost him something. That small nod hooked me harder than any argument. This wasn't an abstract community. It was faces, hands, routine. I pulled a chair out for myself. "I'm going to ask for public comments," I said. Sarah's pen stopped. "You know what that means," she said. "For you." "I know," I answered. I didn't, not fully. But I knew enough. If I spoke against the approved plan, I'd be marked as difficult. If I stayed silent, I'd be marked as the man who smiled at Sarah over coffee while her building was erased. "Why would you do that?" she asked, and her voice wasn't warm. It was wary. "Because you were right," I said. "Hearing is easy. Staying is hard." She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for a week. "Don't do this for me," she said quietly. "Do it because you can live with it." That was Sarah. No fairy tale promises, no dramatic pleas. Just truth, and the expectation that you could handle it. Over the next days, I prepared like I was building a bridge. I made a clean, simple presentation. A revised layout that preserved the bookstore's footprint, moved the service lane, adjusted utility lines. Numbers, not poetry. I called the older men from the reading group and told them when to show up. It felt strange, asking for help. My whole adult life I'd treated help like debt. On the morning of the hearing, the room was packed. Locals in work jackets, business owners in crisp shirts, town officials with careful faces. Dennis sat in the front row with my company's logo on his folder like a shield. Sarah sat near the aisle with her father beside her, his cane angled against his chair. She didn't look at me. I didn't blame her. Trust doesn't regrow overnight. When the council opened the floor, my heart hammered so hard I thought people would see it through my shirt. I stood anyway. "My name is Alex," I said, hearing my voice echo. I'm an engineer on the project. Dennis's jaw tightened. I kept going. I'm not speaking for my firm today. I'm speaking for myself as a resident. A murmur rolled through the room. Hook number 1. I just separated myself from my company in public. I explained the alternative, how to integrate old structures without breaking the town's rhythm. I pointed to the bookstore on the map, not as a sentimental object, but as an anchor for a living network. The reading knights, the veterans, the older men who didn't have many third places left. When you remove a place like that, I said, you don't just remove brick. You remove the thread that holds people together. My hands shook, but I didn't hide them. Across the room, I saw Sarah's father watching me like he was measuring whether I meant it. Then something unexpected happened. One of the older men stood up, Frank, the one with the rough hands, and said, "That shop keeps us from going home to quiet houses and staying there." His voice cracked, and the room went still. Hook number 2. The town heard the cost in a human voice, not a plan. More people spoke. Not screaming. Just truth. A waitress who said tourists were fine, but locals needed places that weren't priced like attractions. A veteran who said Sarah's readings were the first time he'd felt part of anything since he'd left service. The council chair listened, eyes narrowed, like the script had changed. After the hearing, the hallway filled with people talking at once. Sarah finally approached me, stopping an arm's length away. "You did that," she said. It wasn't praise. It was disbelief. "I had to," I replied. "Did you?" she asked softer. "Or did you finally get tired of being safe?" That question landed because it was true. Then Dennis appeared beside us, smile polite enough to cut. "Alex," he said, "we need a word." He pulled me a few steps away. "You just made this personal," he said quietly. "And expensive." "It was already personal," I answered. "You're an employee," he said. "Not a hero." "I'm a person," I said, and felt how unfamiliar it was to claim that. Dennis didn't argue. He just nodded, like he'd confirmed a diagnosis. "Your promotion is off the table," he said. "Effective immediately." Then he walked away. Hook number 3. The price was real, and it had my name on it. That night, the bookstore was closed, but the back room lights were on. The reading group had gathered anyway, not for a chapter, but because they didn't know what to do with relief and fear at the same time. I sat at the wooden table, listening as they joked softly to cover their nerves. Sarah moved behind the counter, making coffee like routine could hold the world together. When she brought me a mug, her hand paused near mine for half a second. Close enough to feel the warmth, not close enough to promise anything. "I'm not asking you to stay forever," she said quietly, eyes on the mug. "I'm asking you to be honest about what you can do." I nodded. "I can stay for the project," I said. "I can take it 1 month at a time. I can show up." She looked at me then, really looked. "And if you get offered something bigger?" she asked. The old Alex would have promised anything to avoid discomfort. This time I didn't. "Then we talk," I said. "No disappearing." She held that for a moment, like she was testing the strength of it. Then she gave a small, tired smile. "Okay," she said. "Not forever. Not, I forgive you. Just okay." Later, as the older men laughed at one of her father's dry stories, I watched Sarah pour coffee, steady and ordinary, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace that didn't come from control. I didn't know how long it would last. I just knew I wasn't running.